In the land of Metazoa, anthropomorphic animals known as dire are in the middle of a holy war. But as the battle rages on, it's the innocent civilians in the surrounding areas that are facing the most destruction. For some of the soldiers, this is just far too high a price to be paying. This is Hallowed, Chapter 1. Hello there, Geek Collective, and welcome to Geeks Plus Comics, more than just your average geek. And we are here today with another comic review, checking out Hallowed Chapter 1 from Ominous Media. It was a Kickstarter project that was successfully funded last year. It was one that I personally backed, and it actually arrived today, day of filming, which is kind of cool. I had the digital already that I was starting to use for a review, and then this came in today. That is a stunning looking cover, and also very well, you might see it matches that shield. I got a little patch as well for the Harbingers who we'll meet in the story, which is pretty cool. I won't show you because it does have my address on it, but it also came in a padded envelope that was specifically for Hallowed and had the Hallowed logo all over it. It was actually really cool. But I'm excited to check this out. Hallowed was described as a dark fantasy horror story, which is something that was just right up my alley. It had a really interesting premise, had stunning looking artwork on the Kickstarter page. I am all about fantasy stuff. I love fantasy stories. I love getting into that sort of world that really speaks to my Dungeon Master brain. If you guys don't know, I am the Dungeon Master for our Chronicles of Andrasia campaign that Geeks Plus does over on our tabletop channel and live on our Twitch. So I love all that sort of stuff, so this really speaks to that side of it. And then if you've been on the channel for any length of time, you probably know at this point, I'm a huge fan of horror comics. I've got a real special place for them. I really enjoy reading them. So to know this has got a horror element to it as well, absolutely, completely something that I would want to check out. So I, of course, backed it. Just double checking my numbers here. So when it was backed in November, it raised $5,841 at the end of the campaign, and was even branded on Kickstarter as a project we love. With all that hype around it, can possibly be anything bad about it, but how do we know unless we dive in? So we are going to jump straight into it. Right before we do that though, if you are enjoying the content here, head down below, hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future content. We have a lot of amazing videos coming for you in the near future. You don't want to miss out on them, and leave some likes and comments down below, as it really does help us out in the algorithm, and we greatly appreciate it. But let's do it, let's jump on in. Hallowed Chapter 1 is written by Stück, with artwork from Riccardo Faccini. Colours and lettering are both done by Noah Baslé. Apologies for any mispronunciations in those names. Our issue begins with a little bit of an exposition dump in the form of a scroll, setting the scene for the world that we are about to inhabit. I will go into my thoughts on this opening in the review part of the video, but for now I will say that delivering the information in this way was a little bit torturous for my ADHD. It did make it a bit of a slog to get through this first opening page. Knowing what comes later in this issue, I am certain that some of the information here is going to become very useful with what's to come in the story. In fact, all of it might very well be. But I would rather that it was delivered in a way where it was embedded into the story we were experiencing, rather than all being given up front in this way. It just made it really tough to kind of get into, and didn't fully connect with what we were reading in the book, but that's just my take on it. Alright, let's get into the actual story that we read in this issue. An alliance has been formed amongst the empires of the old world. The elves, orc, duendes and humans have rallied together to face the continent of Ferriscore. Absent from this conflict, however, are the dire, a race of anthropomorphic animals on the continent of Metazoa. They are the youngest of the races, and their origins are a mystery to the other people of the world. They are actively in their third civil war, known as the Third Tear, which has become a religious war between two factions of faith, battling it out for the holy city of Biliteria. The war has brought devastation to the land, leaving commoners' lives and cities in tatters. The realities of the war and this destruction is causing more deserters than ever on both sides of the conflict. We then join a group of harbingers, holding position in a snowy forest just outside of a walled town. Baslé, the cleric of the group, is surveying the town, and their leader Flag asks him for an update. He advises that he sees only some guards and a few townies, but nothing odd. The only odd thing they've experienced are the tremors. Eckhart, the flambeau or lightkeeper, tells Baslé they are called landquakes and are actually fairly common in northern Metazoa. Flag asks if he can see any of the apostles, and he reports that he doesn't see any, nor would he expect to this far west, to which Flag reminds him of their mantra, to the ends of the earth. Flag gathers the harbingers around him to explain what's next, to which a hare named Valerie and what I believe is a bat named Rambo voice their concerns for this plan. When asked for an alternative, Valerie advises that they circumvent the town altogether and continue west until they are clear of the tear belt. A badger dyer, Nicola, states that there is nothing west of them until Strelgover, and states that they would starve long before they reached the other town. Valerie voices their concerns with the mapping of the area, stating that the maps that Eckhart has made are outdated and they do not believe that they accurately represent what's there. As Eckhart tries to argue against the belief his maps are outdated, Valerie continues that they would rather continue on and risk starving than going into the town where God knows what is waiting and backing themselves into a corner. Rambo throws in his piece too, that a little town like this likely never sees harbingers, so they will seem out of place, especially going in the opposite direction of the front line. Nicola, however, argues that it is far more suspicious to see harbinger troops intentionally passing by shelter and the possibility of food and continuing through a snowstorm like this than stopping. Flag brings the back and forth to a halt. He states that he has vowed that he would get them home, and that's what he plans to do. They need food and supplies, and if they pass by the town, then they risk freezing or starving to death if they aren't smart. He tells the group that the apostles are at least 3 days behind them, plenty of time to get what they need and continue forward. But if there is a problem, then they will handle it. Rambo and Valerie are still unconvinced and ask what if they refuse to go with him, and he merely says, "Then Godspeed." Out of earshot of the group, Eckhart says to Flag that he's shocked that Flag is letting them go, to which he responds that they aren't his to keep. In fact, none of the group are, not anymore. He says that he gave up that right the moment he turned his back on the tear, as they're all traitors and equals now. Flag will lead those that still wish it, and he intends to do his damnedest to get them home. But he no longer has any illusions of stature. As Rambo and Valerie head off through the snow, the other harbingers make their way into the town. As they make their way through the town, one of the harbingers, Celine, spots a prisoner caged and off to the side. It's a member of the opposing army, one of the insect-like dyer that follow the teachings of Kami. The harbingers press on to the local tavern, where they eat their fill and get themselves warmed by a roaring fire. They had been numbed by the cold and can finally start to feel their fingers again. As they take rest, the table is approached by the tavern keep, who apologises for interrupting them, as they must be weary from their travels. But he and a number of the patrons are eager to hear news from the front line, and ask if they can spare a moment to update them on the battle. But before the tavern keeper can finish inquiring of the harbingers, the other patrons butt into the conversation and start yelling questions at the harbingers. Do we still hold Bilateria? How many Hintiac have you killed? Why are you here? Is the tear over? Flag is quick to place back on his helmet and tries to diffuse the rising tensions of their current predicament. He tells the group that all of their questions will be answered, but for now he and his group are weary from their travels and must retire for the evening. Unfortunately, the tavern patrons aren't buying it and say that they seemed hearty enough moments ago. As the tavern keeper tries to calm the situation, Flag tells his group to be ready to move. The patrons accuse the harbingers of being deserters and cowards. Flag grabs his axe, but before they come to blows, another massive tremor occurs. They state that the tremors have been worse these past few weeks, and they wonder if what the Hintiac, the insect-like dyer, told them is actually the truth. As Flag tries to gather more information, we see that Celine is outside with the Hintiac prisoner, the one that we've seen her locking eyes with when entering the town. She gives him some food, and he tells her that he came here to warn the town that the Hintiac were coming, and that she needs to free him, and they both need to run very fast. Flag berates the patrons for not heeding the Hintiac warning. He turns to tell the group to pack up, they are leaving, when all of a sudden he's hit in the back with a wooden chair, thrown by the dog-like dyer that has been leading the patrons in berating and verbally abusing the harbingers. He mocks that Flag is a coward and won't do anything, only for Flag to hit him in the gut with the handle of his axe, and while he is bent over, he raises it back above his head and swings the axe. Before the tavern patron can even finish pleading for mercy, his head is removed in one swift swing. Unfortunately, he wasn't there alone, and not a second after Flag has beheaded the dog-like dyer, then his son makes his presence known, having seen his father just be killed in front of him. Guilt and sorrow grasp Flag as he sees tears in the boy's eyes. But before he can say or do anything, a monstrous sandworm crashes through the floor of the building. As the harbingers get their bearings, they are now faced with a massive worm in the centre of the tavern. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, an army of Hintiacs start to pull themselves out of the hole in the ground and begin to attack the harbingers and the patrons of the tavern. Flag immediately goes into battle mode, calling, "To me, my harbingers! Move or die!" as they begin to run through and hack down the Hintiac soldiers. We then move outside the building and see that it is sheer chaos in the entire town. I don't know if the worm that we see outside and the Hintiac soldiers have made their way there from the tavern, or if it's a second group that are attacking, but regardless, we see the town ablaze. Celine has freed the Hintiac prisoner, and together they are riding horses through the flames, with more horses in tow. Celine starts to lead them towards the harbingers to provide aid, while the Hintiac argues this is a bad idea. As Celine threatens him with returning to his cage, her horse is snatched up by the worm in its mouth, and she is launched through the air and against some of the rubble, with her helmet being knocked off. As she stands to her feet, she is surrounded by 4 Hintiac soldiers. She draws her blades to fight, and we see her face for the first time. Celine isn't a dyer. She is an elf. As some of the Hintiacs spot the freed prisoner, they cry that he is a traitor. But as they go to attack, Celine springs into action and cuts them down. Then she throws a sword to the freed prisoner, who runs it through the Hintiac holding him, killing him dead. The prisoner sees that she is an elf and asks why she's here, but she tells him that she'll explain it all later. For now, she needs to know how to kill this sandworm as they stand alone in the blazing town, face to face with it. We then join Rambo and Valerie on their trek. They are still in the snowy forest, standing on a hill overlooking the town, and see that it is on fire. As Rambo laments that the other harbingers are likely dead and how they try to warn them, Valerie calls him over as he's found something. As he makes his way across the hill, on the other side they find a black tower with a glowing red light in the middle of the snowy mountains. Rambo's in shock that Valerie was actually right. Not only were the maps out of date, but somehow Eckhart had missed a forest and tower in the middle of all this. Valerie then tells him that he wasn't actually talking about the tower. What he was actually talking about was her, as he points towards a figure approaching them. An elf woman, with blood on her hands and legs, wearing nothing but a robe that she's holding closed. And our issue comes to a close, with the elf woman reaching them and asking them one question: if they could please tell her what year it is. Hey there, Geek Collective. Did you know that Geeks Plus is also on Patreon? For as little as just $2 a month, you can also support us over on Patreon and get early access to all of our YouTube videos from Geeks Plus Comics, Geeks Plus Tabletop, and Geeks Plus Gaming, as well as a whole bunch of exclusive content specifically for our supporters over on Patreon, and early access to all the behind the scenes and ongoings with the company. So if you would like to check out all of that stuff and help support what we do here at Geeks Plus, we would greatly appreciate heading over to patreon.com/geeksplusmedia and supporting us over there. But that's all from me from now. You all have a good day, and let's get back into your video. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed Hallowed Chapter 1. I really liked the way we left it off with the intrigue as the fact of there are two elves that we now know of in Metazoa, and I'm really curious to see how those stories play out. This area that was found by Valerie and Rambo, with the elf walking away from it and even the state that she's in, and then the fact of that part of the Harbinger, Celine, a member of this group of Dire, is actually an elf. How did she get involved in it? This area is meant to be exclusively for Dire. Metazoa is meant to only be for the Dire, so why are there elves here? How did they get involved? And this is the thing I was saying at the start with that whole like wall of text explaining the world, is like, if it wasn't for the reveal of the elves here, I would honestly have said that it was pointless, at least for this first chapter. But I appreciate the world building that was in there to set up this world, because like, I understand world building, I love world building. I created my own homebrew world as part of a D&D campaign that we ran in Chronicles of Andrasia, so I understand building your own world, and you create stuff and ideas of how it works, and I get wanting to share that with the people that are going to be enjoying your story. But I would have much preferred that information to being passed on actually through interactions. Like, now that we're seeing the elves, if we got to know a bit more about the world, Metazoa and the world as a whole in the second chapter, when we can actually equate it to characters we've met and characters we've experienced. Because not only are these characters like brand new to us and we still need to experience who they are, you know, you need to give us a reason to invest in the characters and their story and what they're doing. You've now also given us a sheer wall of text that just makes it very hard to get endeared to it, because, at least for me, I'm already put off. I struggle with walls of text like that. I struggle with big info dumps like that that's done in written word, because my brain just wants to go, don't worry about it. And I did force myself to read it for the review, but I'm like, if I'd just been reading that regularly, there is a good chance that I would not have read the full thing. Overall though, that opening bit is probably my main criticism. I think it could have been done better, but the story itself I was intrigued with. The world that was built, this holy war that's going on, the tear, sorry. I don't know why I said tier, it was in my head because it's T-E-A-R for a second there. But the tear and the way this holy war is built, and the fact that we're with a group of harbingers that don't want to be involved, they're all traitors, they're all runaways who don't want to be in it. And they've all gone AWOL. And we're following this group as his flag is trying to get his group home. But we're also getting the expansion of the world, the fact that the group's not staying together. We've got a couple of them finding stuff in the forest, and how is that going to play out when the groups come back together? Now that they have an elf on their team that maybe they'll find out about, or the fact of 2 of their members who have wandered off have now found an elf in this area that wasn't on the maps. And then also we've got a Hintiak, one of the enemy troops, the literal enemy troops that they are fighting, is with one of the harbingers, and it's like there's a lot of really interesting dynamics here. This was definitely a great setup of a first issue for a story that I'm very intrigued about, and I'll definitely be checking out chapter 2. I'm very intrigued with this. I love the world that's been built. I love the fantasy setting. I'll be honest, it was advertised as a fantasy horror, and I'm not getting much of the horror yet. This is just feels like it could have been a D&D campaign, you know, if the horror's like the giant sandworms and the Hintiak soldiers, and I'm like, that's just a D&D encounter in my head, so I'm like, that's still just fantasy. So I don't know if it's going to lean into horror as the story goes, but I wouldn't go into this fully expecting horror, either this issue or in the issues to come, until it actually shows itself. But overall, I think it was a great fantasy story. I think it was a great setup for it. I think it's made a really good foundation to build the rest of this first story arc on, or this whole story, depending how much of it there is to be told. So I would highly recommend checking it out. I don't think it's still available. Some Kickstarter still allow you to sign on. I think we're well past that for it. But I would highly recommend looking out for Hallowed Chapter 2 coming out, where there's a good chance, and when that drops in Kickstarter, there'll be a chance to catch up on it. I would highly recommend checking it out. I would highly recommend picking this up if you are a fan of, you know, medieval and knights and swords and fantasy and fighting giant monsters and anything in that sort of fantasy realm. If you are a TTRPG player or a D&D player like myself, this is going to be something that's right up your alley. So I would highly recommend it for that. I thoroughly enjoyed the story. I thought the artwork was absolutely amazing. Brilliant colouring, brilliantly put together. It was a really well done book and really enjoyable to read. So I would thoroughly recommend this. So go and check it out. Go and check out the creator, Kyle Stück, down below. I'll put some links to his stuff down below to go and check him out to keep updates on the next chapter that's coming out. But that's everything for me from today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I hope you have an amazing day. I hope you have an amazing week. And remember, it's a good week to be a geek. Take care. I'll see you all next time. Peace.